Absolutely, because we have Ms. Leavy here, and also I think we have the professor Mike Hoppert is here, and he made some significant contributions to the book as well. So if you have any questions for Mike or Jane, that'd be great. So so welcome everyone to the Ken Keltner Book Club. Of course, our selection was The Big Fella. And a lot of people kind of said the same thing, like, I don't know if I really want to read a book about Babe Ruth, and it's a tribute, and I don't know if Jane has heard that before, but it's a tribute to your book because it was a page turner. I thought it was outstanding, and the 8 years that it took to write it, you can see it. It's just absolutely incredible. So so it was a pleasure to read, and you know, of course, we enjoy your other writing with the Washington Post. And of course, people have mentioned your other books about Sandy Koufax and Mickey Mantle. So, so I always kind of like to start with a couple of leading questions. And for Jane, how do you decide what you're going to write about? Because you had thought about doing a novel at first. And so what's the process?
It's much more mundane and kind of, well, unromantic than people think. In the case of Koufax, an old friend of mine who I hadn't spoken to actually in 20 years because of the way he left his wife, who was a really good friend of mine, called me up and said, how about you write a book on Sandy Koufax? And my first thought was, absolutely not. I hated him because of what he did to Mickey Mantle in '63. And the second thought was, I'm not writing for you because of what you did to Jerry, my friend Geraldine, you know, in 1982. And then she said, well, I don't care. You know, if you want to deal with him, go ahead. So I wasn't going to do him. And actually, you know, people said to me, what, are you crazy? I mean, you know, it's a gimme, do it. So I wrote to Koufax, never expecting to hear from him. And one afternoon I came home to find a message on my tape machine saying, Mrs. Leavy, and he said it right, you know? So I thought, holy shit, he really is Jewish from Brooklyn. And he said, I don't really have any interest in your project. Then he said, this is Sandy. And then, you know, he's one of those people on first name basis with the universe. And then he said, oh, Koufax. And yeah, right. I have no interest in your project, but if you want to talk to me about it, you know, I'll call you back. Well, the first thing reporters learn is nobody returns your calls. And if they do return it once, they're certainly not going to return it twice. Damned if he doesn't call. And he says, hi, this is Sandy Koufax. I really don't have any interest in your project, and then I interrupted. And I did what I am very good at doing, which is talking without letting anybody get a word in edgewise for an hour and a half. And I told him what kind of book I wanted to write and how I really didn't care about his ex-wives, and which I really didn't, actually. I mean, what an ex-wife said. I'm an ex-wife, I know what I say, so I wouldn't want anybody quoting me. And after, you know, I could tell he was really well raised because he didn't interrupt. He never said a word. And when I finally ran out of things to say, and I had said everything, including that I hated his guts because of what he did to Mickey in '63, he said, well,
I don't recall what he did.
I
don't recall what he did.
I can't hear you.
I don't recall what he did.
Well, he struck out 15 Yankees in the first game of the World Series, despite the New York Post having pulled his biological father off the street, a man he hadn't seen or heard from in, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, something like that, and had him, you know, set up a meeting in the bottom of Yankee Stadium, which was not something Sandy was too happy about. Didn't he break Erskine's record that day, Mike?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And he made, you know, he struck out the first 5 Yankees, and it was over. It was just over. And, you know, Berra had the famous line, 25 and 5 was the record, I think, that year. I don't remember. I don't memorize this stuff. And he said, what I want to know is how did he lose 5? So anyway, at the end of the conversation, Sandy said, I still have no interest in your project, but if you want to come to Vero Beach and talk to me about it, that would be fine. And I went, and I went down, and by the time I got back, we had made a deal, which I was perfectly happy to make. He said he wouldn't be quoted on the record. This is all the introduction. He didn't want to do a regular interview, but I could call him anytime I wanted to check matters of fact. And he asked me to do one thing, which was leave his niece and nephew, children of his late sister, Edie, out. I had no problem. And I volunteered. I said, I'm not going to call your ex-wives. I don't care. And so he still attributes this to a very nice lady, an unauthorized biography by a really neat lady, which I think is hilarious. He, of course, corrected every fact in there. So he didn't tell me everything, but whatever he told me was dead on 100% factual, which is, a gift to a writer. I didn't even appreciate what a gift it was. When that was done, they said, well, what do you want to write next? And I said, I want to do Willie, Mickey, and the Duke in New York, in Cafe Society in the 50s, when New York was still the capital of baseball. And this is a direct quote, so you know that I'm not making this up. The editor, the ex-husband of my friend who I didn't want to deal with, now my editor again, says, well, nobody gives a shit about the Duke and nobody can stand Willie, do the Mick. So they, publishing tells you what to write, basically, unless you don't care about how much you sell. And then when it came to the Babe, I wanted to do, and actually sold a novel on him. And novels bring you maybe a tenth of the advance of nonfiction. And so I was in a situation where I needed the money more than I needed to be able to exercise my novelistic genes. So I ended up doing the one thing I swore I would never do, another goddamn book about Babe Ruth. And
It's so different. It's so different. It's
so am I. So am I, by the way. I spent a year researching before I even signed a contract, because I had to persuade myself that there was a way to do it that was different enough from what had been done before that I could live with it. There was no point in trying to do better what Bob Creamer did terrifically well. There was no point in trying to.
That was a good book.
Yeah, it was a very good book. There was a Babe anniversary in 74, 75, which is to say when Hank was about to, tie him. And so a plethora of books came out, but it was really before the, sea change in how you wrote biographies about athletes. And when I sat down to read all of them, which I did, I discovered one thing very quickly. Not a single one devoted more than a page, maybe a page, to the first 20 years of his life. And reporters have built-in bullshit detectors. And that doesn't make any sense. And if it's something that across the board, it's intentional. Somebody wanted it not to be written about. And that somebody, of course, was Babe Ruth. And his agent, Christy Walsh. Christy probably would have wanted it to be written about, but Babe didn't want people to know what really the story was about his family, which was a sordid tale of infidelity and alcoholism and violence. And it was more acceptable to him in the world that he lived on, a world that didn't have confessional interviews with Diane Sawyer or whoever, where you go on TV and lean on their shoulder telegenically and have everybody be sympathetic. You just didn't talk about people getting divorced in 1906. And the thing that I thought would work most against me, which was that everybody was dead, everybody you wanted to talk to was presently dead. That's a Casey Stengel ripoff. Actually worked to my advantage because it was so much after the fact that the digital revolution had enabled all these collections, archival collections of family material, as well as newspaper material to become accessible. There's no way, and Bob Creamer was a great you know, reporter and a great writer. Same with Lee Montville, all those guys who did it. If they had been in my position, they would have found what I found. So it's not like, you know, they probably wouldn't have spent 8 years on it though. They're not crazy like me. So
What was
I-
Michael's contribution?
What was Michael's contribution?
Yeah,
Well, I think that I kept him from falling asleep on the road the first time we talked. What did we talk from Ohio, Iowa or something? How long was that conversation?
You called me somewhere west of Cooperstown, and I had to hang up when I was approaching Chicago because I didn't want to miss my turn. So we crossed Ohio and Indiana for sure.
Yeah, when I went to the Hall of Fame, you know, there's certain boxes you check right away. And so first you go to the Hall of Fame where you find out that, should I say this, Mike? Thanks. Okay. Where you find out that whatever it is not a research facility for writers and academics. The files there are loosely defined. I mean, any research library at any university, you know, would be appalled. I mean, the Babe Ruth file is like 5 manila envelopes of old clippings, you know, not sorted by date, not sorted by anything, just falling out of the folders. And it's not really entirely their fault. They don't have the budget for it, and it's not how they started out in life. It's not what they started out to be. It's a shrine and not really a research library. But Tom Schieber, who was at that time putting together the new Babe Ruth exhibit, which opened in 2014. Here comes my dog. Hi, Betty. You know, said, oh, there's the guy you got to talk to, you know, and he's the guy who found in in boxes put away in it wasn't a storage closet. What was it, Mike? It was a
storage closet. Yeah.
Okay. You know, all the records that Jacob Rupert, owner of the New York Yankees during, you know, Ruth's tenure, 14-year tenure, had donated to the Hall after his death. And nobody had looked at them. Nobody. They had been accessioned, right? But not put in any kind of order.
This is one of those cases where you're better to be lucky than smart, because I happened to be there asking, Schechter at the time was the guy who ran the desk, and I was pestering him for information on the financial background of anything, any kind of contract information I could find. And he brought me a file of about 3 things, that's all they had. And then this guy came over to me afterwards and he said, hey, I heard you're from Wisconsin. You're looking for financial stuff. I'm from Wisconsin and I'm out here on an exchange and I'm helping them accession some stuff. And we don't know what this is, but it looks like it's financial. So he brought out this volume and I started to look through it and I recognized what it was. It was some of the account books. And I said, wow, this is really neat. And he said, we have 73 volumes of these. Come here, let's go look at them. So they took me into a storage closet where these 73 volumes were piled into boxes. They had been in the Hall of Fame, and I don't know the exact date, but somebody here will, since Yankee Stadium, the original Yankee Stadium was renovated by George Steinbrenner.
374.
Okay, that's how long they'd been at the Hall of Fame, because it turns out that the Cliff Cakeline, who at the time was the head librarian there, had a friend who worked for the Yankees, and he called and said, Cliff, the new guy is renovating the stadium and we have to move stuff out and he doesn't want to pay storage. We're throwing away tons of stuff. Come and take whatever you want. And so he got a whole lot of stuff.
So what I wrote that Jake Rupert willed it to the Hall is wrong?
It was not willed, it was given. It was before. So the documents were owned by the Yankees. Those were Rupert's documents, owned by the Yankees. And Steinbrenner gave them away. So I don't know what Rupert, I assume that when Rupert sold the team, he sold the documents as well. Everything went along with it.
God, I have to make a correction.
It sounds nicer that Rupert did that.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Tom Schieber, the senior curator, said, oh, there's this guy you got to talk to. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's got it all. He's got it all. Because one of the things I really set out to do, and it maybe was to the detriment of the book in some ways, was to write about him not only as a baseball player, which displeased some readers, but as really the first first modern American celebrity. And by which I mean someone who wanted to be famous, exploited his fame, amortized his fame, and who established the notion that athletes could and should be paid as much for what they did off the field as what they did on the field. And from the very beginning, I said, if I can document that he made as much money from vaudeville and, well, I didn't do autograph signings, but radio and product placements and all these things that we didn't have words for then I really had something. And of course, here was the man who could add it all up and tell me that in 1920, beginning in 1927, he earned more money for his off the field activities than he did from the New York Yankees. And while it wasn't by a hell of a lot, it was quite the precedent. And it is actually, in my view, and I think Mike's too, a template for how. I'm having trouble hearing you. Oh, my watch is talking to me. Sorry, let me put that in the drawer here. It's a template. Everything that you know, LeBron and Jordan and all these other characters have done is really, you know, well, it's exponentially bigger because of television money. So it's not in the same league. But what did we decide that the 73,000 and change that he earned in 27 was the equivalent of what, 26 million in 2016 dollars?
Yeah, it was in the 8 figures. I don't remember the exact amount.
Well, just feature that in 1927. I mean, that's big dough, and it's something that, you know, no athlete was seeing. I mean, boxers would get big paydays, but they fought once, twice, 3 times a year, that kind of thing. Everybody was trying to make a dime, doing ghostwriting and all sorts of stuff like that. But again, you know, my argument is that Babe Ruth was a revolutionary in every conceivable way. He didn't have any respect for authority or precedent, so why should he, you know, abide by any of them? Why shouldn't he have an agent who worked to make him as much money as possible? Why shouldn't he barnstorm against Negro Leaguers? Why shouldn't he swing from the heels when everybody else was playing scientific baseball and taking orders from the likes of John McGraw? So this guy, you know, was an original in every conceivable way. And athletes have been dining out off of him ever since. They just don't know it.
Is it true? There's this quote that that attributes to him when he was asking for his salary one year, and I don't know who might have been Rupert, said, that's going to cost you more than the president makes. And he said, why not? I had a better year.
You know, here's the problem. It's one of the things that I realized pretty much at the beginning. Reporters didn't quote athletes back in the day. They didn't see any point in it. What were they going to say that was better than what Damon Runyon could see or come up with in a press box? They just, and deadlines made it difficult to do so. Nobody went down to the locker room to watch people scratch their balls. It just didn't happen. And so anything that Babe Ruth did say would have been cleaned up or improved in some way or another. Just like all the things that Yogi Berra said, he never said. You know, I mean, maybe a couple of them, but most of them he never said. And the hardest thing, and again, this goes back to the Hall of Fame, was finding Babe Ruth's actual voice. It's something that I could believe he actually felt and said, because everything he wrote, everything that came out of his mouth, you know, was penned for him by one of his agent's many ghostwriters. You know, he didn't write columns. It's like, it's laughable that anybody thinks he might have. maybe he answered a couple of questions here and there. In the first years that he was doing it, he would send back a, 5-word telegram, hit another today, thanks, bye, that kind of thing. So I actually was able, and this was pure happenstance, given the state of the Hall of Fame files, to find, and it wasn't even all of it, most of a 1963 story written by a guy named Jan Robbins, now deceased, who in 1934 won an essay writing contest at his high school in Brooklyn. I think it was Abraham Lincoln. Believe it or not, I haven't read this book recently, so if I get something wrong, somebody tell me. And the prize was you got to go and interview Babe Ruth in the Yankee locker room, where it was his last year. He was broken down. He was taking drugs for his knees. Supposedly he wasn't talking to Gehrig, yet they were bantering over, what he had to do to get a hit when this kid arrived. And the kid, being a kid, did two things. He wrote everything down that the guy actually said, unlike grown-up reporters who didn't care, and he kept his notes. So that, lo and behold, years later, when he became a writer for sport, and it was the anniversary of Babe's death and his last appearance at Yankee Stadium in June 1948, he pulled out his yellow pad where he had written down everything Babe Ruth actually said. And the kid asked him questions that no adult had been smart enough to ask. What are you thinking about in the batter's box while you're waiting for the pitch? Oh, well, I'm thinking about that watch that I bought Claire. I hope she likes it. That was a standard line of his. So I know that's true because he pulled that one out all the time. And I'm thinking about whether there's enough barbecue sauce on the pork chops last night, but once the pitcher goes into the windup, and I'm messing this up, I don't know it by heart, all I see and all I think about is the pitch, and that's what I lean into. Thank you, Susan Stamberg. Somebody was ahead of you. And that sounded so authentic. I thought, okay, that's the guy. And then the kid asked him about, how he felt about the fact that he hadn't been named Yankee manager, which is, of course, all the topic in all the tabloids and broadsheets in New York, of which there were then many. And the kid was trying to sound like a grown up. So how about that? They don't want to hire you. And Babe goes nuts on the kid. That's what's wrong with you reporters, to a 14-year-old boy. Haven't I always given you something to write? Haven't I always talked to you? Why won't you give a guy a break? Yeah, I ran around in my time, but I've changed. Can't you give me a break? And boy, did that sound like a real human being. That's not anything any ghostwriter was coming up with then.
Were you able to corroborate the fact that he pointed to center field at Wrigley Field during that World Series?
I have to tell you something, Ken. I don't really care whether he pointed to center field.
Okay.
There are so many people who have written so many books about it. Barring a replay that somebody captured on technology that we didn't know existed in 1932, showing it exactly, we're not gonna know because all the angles are bad, the film is old, and this, Gehrig said he did it, Gehrig testified that it was a called shot. What you do know though, and this is what interested me, was that, the tension between the Cubs and the Yankees at that point was awful. There had been knockdown pitches. It was a really testy game. And the Cubs were bench jockeying Ruth from their dugout. And they were calling him what he was named, not kindly, on the playground at St. Mary's and back in Baltimore, where he was known as Nigger Lips. Your mother crossed over. She went over the other side, and he did not like that much. And so the angle of the camera that from third base, where you see him pointing, partly he's pointing at the dugout and saying, shut the fuck up. He was pissed. He was really pissed. And the African-American press, which of course didn't count, wrote a very different story. than the accounts in in the white papers. You know, there was Amos Latimer, who was this traveling secretary for the Chicago 47th Street Giants. I think I'm looking at my picture, their championship team up there. I think that's right. Rube Foster was the manager of that team. And, you know, they had been calling him brother from the outfield, the stands in Wrigley where black folks were allowed to sit, and they were throwing lemons at him, you know. And there's their version was that he was pointing at the black folks and telling them to shut the fuck up. So I like it better that we don't know, frankly. I don't think you always want to know. Some things are better left the way they are.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Say, Jane, you mentioned the vaudeville, which makes me think of when Ruth was in Minnesota in 25, and you and I had been in contact because he sent that picture when Ruth visited Glen Lake,
Yep.
Later a reform school, which I was nearly a resident of, a sanitarium back there, but the kids around him had the loincloths on. And I know we went back and forth with that. And I know you mentioned it in the book. And I think you talked to Eddie Cohen, whose dad was a superintendent. But do you ever find what the hell the loincloths were about?
Well, it was a tubercular ward. It was a tuberculosis hospital for kids. And
right.
They were airing out their privates. I mean, you know, the picture is phenomenal. It's absolutely unbelievable. I know I found it and I had the rights to it from, who had the rights? I guess it would have been a Minneapolis paper back in the day. You know, I don't remember, honestly. But it was a sanitarium for kids. Now, what I can't figure out is that Ruth was there in the fall. I mean, late fall, maybe even beginning of November, and he's wearing an overcoat. And there are these kids in nothing but these loincloths. So how does that work?
Little shrinkage.
Little shrinkage. Got a good airing. But there were little girls in loincloths too, by the way.
Jane?
It's an amazing picture. If I had it somewhere, I'll send it to you. I do have it, but I don't know where it is right now. Yeah.
Jane, before we leave the matter of his celebrity, I'd like to go back and pick your brain about the confluence of Walsh's connection and to Ruth and Ruth's willingness to accept that role. And maybe the question I'm most interested in is, Walsh had this quote idea, from what you said, to approach him and with this notion of celebrity. But could that have worked with someone earlier, say, for example, Ty Cobb? If Walsh had this quote idea before that, was there any chance, or was there something else going on here that made that work?
Well, there's two things. One, he didn't go into it with this idea of, I'm going to create celebrity. It happened as a consequence of things he chose to do that could only have happened in the 20s as a result of the advances in technology that made newspapers and news itself be more than local. I mean, yeah, Jack Dempsey was a national figure. Yeah, you know, Man o' War was, Bill Tilden and all that, Newt Rocky, they were national, but you didn't know what happened that night until, in many parts of the country, till days later, right? So, you have the strange thing when you look through archives of, a paper in Arkansas is announcing that, Babe Ruth hit a 60th home run on November 10th, right? I mean, there was like this dissonance in time. And so could you have found a personality to market it before Babe Ruth? Yeah, people tried in various ways, but they didn't have Madison Avenue, which was an outgrowth of war propaganda. They didn't have disposable income that allowed people to buy things that athletes put their names on. They didn't have radio, which, as you guys all know, first game was broadcast on radio was out of Pittsburgh in August 21. And to show you how fast things were changing, that month, there was a critical series with the Cleveland Indians And the East Side residents of Manhattan didn't want to be in a position of having to wait until the afternoon paper arrived at the corner, candy store to know what was going on at the Polo Grounds. So they got a guy with a pigeon to go over to the Polo Grounds and fly back and forth every half inning, to give them updates. That is only 6 years before 1927 World Series, which is broadcast nationally, coast to coast, not on one radio network, but two. So the revolutionary moment there in technology, marketing, money is every bit as significant and overwhelming as was, the advent of personal computing for us. Walsh was out of work. He'd been fired repeatedly from jobs as a flack for a car maker that went bankrupt, and he did sports cartooning. Okay, not great. He did some sports writing. Okay, not great. And in February 21, when he went and, waylaid the beer guy who was going to take a case of beer up to the Babe's apartment, he was just looking for, a way to make a dime. He was in deep shit. And so he offered Babe Ruth money for his, columns that was unlike anything he had made before or anybody had made before. And he went into the hockey, had to borrow money from a bank. It was an idea born of desperation. Other people had done ghostwriting and been paid for including the Babe, but not for any kind of substantial money. And Walsh organized into a syndicate, and he had a lot of clout with editors who who wanted the Babe's column, and then would do him favors to make sure Babe, if a bad story was coming along, they'd leave it out. If there was a good story coming out, they'd play it prominently. So he was a kind of genius. I mean, he was the real Jerry Maguire.
Thanks.
Sure.
So I was fascinated by, there's a quote from Waite Hoyt about that nobody would really know the Babe. But through this book, I feel like we really have. But I mean, do you feel like we've uncovered? He's such a dynamic person. I mean, there are the crudities and then the successes. I don't know. He's still hard for me to figure out.
Well, he's human. So, he doesn't fit into any one slot easily. I don't think he was the idiot he was portrayed as being. I think it was, he was street smart, to say the least. I don't think he was a literary genius either. I think, the story, have you all read the book already? The stuff about his childhood, which was basically that his father caught his mother screwing the bartender from downstairs, and she'd been trading sexual favors for booze. She was an alcoholic. And George Sr. had told the bartender, no booze under any circumstances. And they had this little side deal going. And George Sr. found Mrs. Ruth. Well, this is a direct quote from the testimony of the Screwer, the bartender, George Screwer, who said, I fucked Mrs. Ruth on the digging room floor. So that was his confession. And with that, George Sr. threw Katie Ruth out of the house. She would never return except to pick up her clothes. And it was actually public. I mean, George Herman Ruth Sr. was an important enough guy in Baltimore, not a poor, suffering, unsuccessful dude that he's always portrayed as being, that he belonged to the most important German social club. And he was important enough that this divorce made news in every Baltimore daily newspaper. So, that's what Babe Ruth didn't want anybody to know. So when people would come to him and say, so, did you have parents? Because the belief grew out of ignorance and his silence that he was an orphan because he was sent to this place that was always referred to as an orphanage, even though it wasn't an orphanage. It was a Catholic institution for wayward, abandoned, and incorrigible boys run by a lay order of called the Zavarian Brothers. And so immediately people assumed, well, he was an orphan. Well, no, he wasn't an orphan. And when people would say to him, this is as far as he would go. So, he didn't have any parents, right? Really pissed, and he pounded his fist. I had parents, but then he would never go any further because, you didn't say that and you didn't admit that back then. So the fact of his silence and his reluctance to be forthright, which I think was completely in keeping with the times, meant that people imposed on that 20-year void description of his life all sorts of ideas. The other one was, of course, that he was a crook and he was running amok on the waterfront in Baltimore. The only problem with that is he didn't live on the waterfront in Baltimore. At a time when, a 6-year-old boy, a mile distance is a big distance to travel. And I'm sure Babe got around, but the idea, the image that you all have of him being down by the docks and, stealing stuff from oystermen, unloading their catch, it's just not true. He grew up in a very, very stable German, neighborhood right by the big place where all the railroad yard was. It was very stable. He lived in a joint house with his aunt and his uncle and, tons of cousins. He was surrounded all the time by adults. So all the images, and this is the hardest thing to do in a book, is to let go of all of those and question even the things that you think are written in stone, because they're usually not.
And just the loss of siblings. I mean, that's one thing that,
yeah, I mean,
it's hard to fathom.
His sister, Mamie, always said that Kate Ruth bore 8 children and buried 6 of them. I could only find documentation in Maryland archives and Pennsylvania archives and any other archives I could get my hands in for 6 children born to Kate and George Sr. Of those 6, 4 died. The only 2 who survived were George Jr. and Mamie. There was a little boy named William, middle initial E, who was the last child born to them in August 1905. And he died just shy of his first birthday in a sanitarium without, as far as I can tell, either parent paying any attention in August 1906. And the death certificates of 3 of the kids say that they died of starvation. One has to wonder whether there was some fetal alcohol syndrome going on, or whether it was simply that Baltimore was the last unsewered big American city at that time. And nothing was pasteurized. There were lots of kids with fatal, intestinal diseases. But the death certificates say starvation, marasmus. That floored me. So he watched child after child after child die. And that in and of itself would have been scarring, not to mention then being sent off to this place to fend for himself and to create a self for himself and a life for himself. So I come away actually incredibly impressed by him, because that's not an easy thing to do. That he was flawed, that he screwed as many women as he could to fill in the gap of his mother. Yeah, okay. He's not the first person in life or literature to do that. He was abandoned is what he was. And he had to figure out a way to be him. And the way he could be him most easily was to be in the company of as many boys who had been like him as possible. So my favorite picture is the one that shows him standing in a crowd of 5,000 boys, all trying to cram themselves into a single image outside of Syracuse ballpark in August 1925, when he was about to have the biggest crisis of his life because he had separated legally from his first wife, Helen, earlier, just a couple of weeks earlier. And then he was going to be fined and suspended for kind of acting out and being the babe 2 weeks later. But there are these kids, you know, and they're draped all over him like a cheap fur boa, you know. Imagine trying to get that close to Aaron Judge today. You know, and he's loving it. There's not a single bone in his body that wanted or needed protection from those kids. You know, this is where he was most comfortable. This is what he knew how to do, was to be public, particularly in the company of little guys. At St. Mary's, there was absolutely no privacy. You ate together, you bathed together, you went to the bathroom together, you went through puberty together, you did whatever boys do under the covers together, and not a shred of privacy. So this is what he knew. He knew how to be public. And that is the thing, I think, that made him qualified eminently, more than anybody else around, to be the first celebrity, because that's what completed him. That's how he felt, you know, at home in his own skin.
Jane, do you also think that he may have been afraid to be alone, or not? He was not accustomed to being alone, so when he was alone, he didn't know what to do with himself. Yeah,
absolutely. And the thing that is perhaps most sad to me is that at the end of his, after his baseball days were over, and at the ignominious end with the Boston Braves in 1935, the phone never rang. Nobody in baseball could find a single thing for Babe Ruth to do. And he kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And I don't even think it was, I don't know that he wanted to be a manager so much as Claire wanted him to be a manager. He just wanted to be wanted. And the repudiation and the abandonment by the institution of baseball and the deprivation of those crowds of boys that he was accustomed to, you know, was a recapitulation, you know, of the abandonment by his family when he was, you know, a wee little guy. And I think it was excruciating for him.
The end of the book touched me far more than I would have thought, because when
You knew he was dead already?
I was hoping that you would change it, but you didn't. But I knew what the ending was going to be, but I felt a lot of sympathy for him and was very emotional about it. And in part, I think it was because he went out alone, and there was nothing that he hated or feared more. And he was just basically alone at the end. And it was so sad. You know, a lot of books about celebrities, you know, we've lost how many Hall of Famers this year? We feel bad for the fans. You know, we've lost a great one. I read that, and I was reading, I feel bad for the Babe.
He's in an oxygen tent, you know. I don't know that he had a come to Jesus moment, although he, you know, by chance, the priest who was assigned to go to the hospital had spent a night at St. Mary's, and it gave, you know, just enough of a bond to make it possible for Ruth to talk to this guy, Father Kaufman, as much as he was likely to talk at all, or able to talk at all. I mean, this was a guy who could only eat soft-boiled eggs and beer for most of the last 6 months of his life. And look at the picture in there of him celebrating his 53rd and last birthday in February, I think February 1948, where he's sharing a birthday cake with two boys he doesn't know. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And I think he made the absolute best of himself that anybody could have. And you know, what better thing can you say on a tombstone or in an obituary than that? He did the best he could, and goddamn it, nobody's done it better, as far as I know.
And he was amazing. He never failed these kids. He always seemed to love being around the kids. Like you hear stories like Mickey Mantle, like sometimes he was wonderful, and then sometimes he was very taciturn. You know?
Yeah, like the kids were kid asks for an autographed ball and he writes, he's there with his mother, and goes, your mother has nice tits. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, Mickey was always good at that, but Mickey was a falling down alcoholic drunk during that part of his life. I don't think he was really a mean guy either. There's the kid who was his bat boy in San Francisco on the San Francisco part of the barnstorming tour in 27. Jack Whitey Stewart claimed that Babe Ruth in the dugout was like, get these kids away from me. I can't stand these little fucking brats, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. On the other, what I do know is that when Whitey was laid out in his coffin, what he had by request laid out with him was the jersey he wore the day he was Babe Ruth's bat boy.
Very cool.
It didn't fit. Oh, sorry.
Why do you think his popularity has sustained us all these years?
How many people completely reinvent something, a game, say? I mean, I wrote it somewhere in there. There are very few athletes who turned what everyone had done and how the game was played into something different. Bill Russell, made defense in the NBA an aggressive and, offensive act. Jimmy Connors turned the return of serve into, a winning shot sometimes, if not the next shot, but then the one after. Bobby Howe, there are certain guys and gals who, just, do it different. And he was an original. I mean, it figures that this kid who really had no, fondness for any kind of authority, when somebody would say to this guy with his 54-ounce bat, well, why don't you choke up and, hit the left, right? Well, you're going to advance the runner from first. Well, why? Why should I do that when I can take one swing and end this thing? And that, he literally took the game into his own hands. And the game that's played today, yes, all homers and strikeouts, but the power game that's played today is the game he invented. Would you agree with that, Mike? Thank you.
So that was well known even at the time. And one of the things that was hard for me to wrap my head around is the way that the Yankees were so cold to him when he left.
Owners are shits? Are you kidding?
Is it just that? It was just cold business? I mean, they were playing in a ballpark that even at the time was credited to him,
By a sports writer, Fred Lieb, on opening day at Yankee Stadium, April 18th, 1923. Ed Barrow did not like him, and he was running the Yankees. He didn't like him from all the way back in Boston when Babe Ruth challenged him to a fight and was his most unimproved self, let's put it that way. So there was that. They felt that they carried him the last couple of years, which they may or may not have done. I mean, his on-base percentage was still higher than anybody else's. What he couldn't do was field. He might have been able to play a couple of more years had there been a DH. In fact, one of the great little items I found, I think I stuck it in a footnote, was in January 1929, there was a proposal to have a designated hitter. And they came to the Babe. What do you think about this, Babe? What? Not bat? Are you kidding me? It's ridiculous. Not play the field? No. He also felt that way about night baseball. But I think that the Yankees, front office attitude was much the same as it was everywhere else in baseball. And there's a reason that even today, the antipathy between owners and players is what it is. And, there's no doubt that the owners, are we all going to be crying this year for what they've lost? I don't think so. I'm sorry. Are you looking at that, Mike? How much did they really lose this last season?
Well, it's really hard to tell because they keep those records so secret.
Right.
But they did not lose as much as everyone says they lost.
Right.
So I believe that baseball lost money because some teams like the Brewers probably lost money on the books, but the Dodgers made plenty of money this year. Cubs made plenty of money this year. So none of these guys are going to be standing in a bread line this year.
And we'll all know how pinched they feel when you start seeing the free agent offers. I mean, if they're crazy and like they've always been, then you know that they're not hurting that bad, or that they have a way of making it back real fast. I do know, I mean, I was one who thought they shouldn't have played this year at all. I actually thought, and this is veering into territory I probably shouldn't veer into, but what the hell? I thought, wouldn't it be great if baseball, since nobody else was doing it, took a stand and said, look, this is not healthy. We don't want to risk our players. We don't want to risk our fans. Let's see you next year. And in the meantime, any MLB game that you want to hear or see on television is free. That would have been how I would have handled this. Instead of, a 60-game season, which was basically spring training, with these people shuffling in and out of wherever they were shuffling in and out of. I mean, they were basically exhibition teams half the time. But the reason they weren't going to do that is they get paid their TV money only after the playoffs and World Series. So that's another reason that they didn't lose that much. I'm an idealist. What if baseball had come out and said, everybody get tested. We'll keep our ballparks open. Everybody come and get tested. The way, people did with voting.
My daughter and I were talking about that just the other day. If they do open up the fans next year, you would have to prove that you were tested.
You have to prove that you had a vaccine.
Yeah.
If there is such a thing,
Yeah.
who knows which ones are actually going to work and who gets what, and whatever. I just figure we're all in hibernation for another 6 months.
Yeah, even
learning
if-
Ruth's loneliness in his final months sort of brings new perspective to that trip he made to Boys Town in November of '47, which it seemed to me that showed his commitment to, what his upbringing meant to him. And of course, it was the last time he probably spent a lot of time with kids, I suspect.
He didn't spend a lot of time with anybody in 47, except the nurse that Ford Motor Company, hired to go with him and give him shots of morphine along the way.
Oh.
I think that, my writing hero, Red Smith, used to be asked back in the day when columnists wrote, 7 days a week, 5 days a week, how do you do that? How do you come up with something that often? And he said, you get gated, like a horse going into the starting gate, you get gated. And athletes, particularly baseball players who travel so much all the time, they get gated. That's the kind of life he knew. And rootlessness, which is such an American idea and is such a major factor in American life, to be mobile in one way or another, was what felt comfortable for him. And again, I think it's more about having been needed and wanted than it was about, there was no, gee, I gotta go see these kids. He could barely open his mouth. He was in excruciating pain and he was a husk of himself, but they wanted him. I had great empathy for him at the end.
Jane, we've got a question and a comment out here. The comment, Jane Leavy, for commissioner after your comment there about baseball.
I think that would have been way better than Rob Manfred.
Yeah. Well, yeah. A question
The
on here.
The marketing genius does this. Give me a break. Oi.
Yeah. And then there's a question here from Tom O'Connell. I find it interesting that the subject of Ms. Levy's books are such lonely people, Mantle, Koufax, Ruth. Could this be one of the reasons they're so fascinated with all three?
Koufax is not a lonely person.
Okay.
That's another one of those shibboleths. it drives me crazy on his behalf now. And I have to tell you, well, I don't have to, but I'm going to tell you, we're close friends now. The last thing I expected was for Sandy Koufax to be a close friend. And he is, improbably. And he's the most decent human being I've ever met in my life. I wrote a piece about him, I can't remember for whom now, in which I said the only thing wrong with Sandy Koufax is that he's not single. He's do any of you know the Yiddish word mensch?
Mhm.
Raise your hands if you know mensch. Okay. It literally means a whole person, but is used to mean, as good a guy as exists, basically. He is that kind of guy. I mean, why else would he have shown up at my daughter's bat mitzvah, when the one thing he hates more than anything else is to be the subject of scrutiny of 250 Jews of a certain age she doesn't know, all of whom want to know him, right? He's not lonely, but in this crazy culture that we live in, the difference between privacy and secrecy is completely different. So he just didn't want to be, for example, Larry King or Tommy Lasorda, the two people I've ever heard him say he hates. He just didn't want to trade off pieces of his soul for mentions in the newspapers or for clickbait or whatever it is. He is as complete a person as I know. And he was never lonely. I mean, he was kind of upset after his first wife left him, but he got over it. And now he's married to a wonderful woman whom I refer to as the other Jane.
And I was just looking in your book between reading it the first time and then some other stuff, the end for him in 48. And you mentioned that he was in Minneapolis and talked to this blind kid, Johnny Ross, who I think was the same one who went to my high school way before me and was a wrestling champion. But that seems like that was his second last time out. And then the other time was soon after when he went to the movie and left early. So I found that interesting, and I've written about it in the SABR book on Babe Ruth, that one of his last real public appearances.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I was maybe in touch with you to ask about that too.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know whether Johnny Ross is alive? I didn't have time.
No, I don't. When my high school closed in '82, Marshall High became Marshall U High in Minneapolis, and they did a big story about the 3 high schools in Minneapolis that were closing, and they had John Ross, who was the wrestling champion, I think state champion. He was blind, was one of the Marshall kids, and that's why I put it together with the John Ross who had visited with him. I figure it's got to be the same one. And I don't know, once my high school went under, like all parts of the past, and he was, well, he would have been a wrestling champion 4 years before I was born. So no, I don't. I might, now you got me curious, and I might poke around like on our high school Facebook page, ask if anybody knows that.
I'd love to write about him if I could find him.
Well, if I luckily come up with something, yeah, for sure. I'd let you know. He sounds like a hell of an interesting guy. Maybe what I also need to do is just go back in the newspapers for the wrestling season there too. But
it should be easy enough to figure out. What year do you think he was the champion?
I think 51.
Okay, big year I was born.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's and I'd have to go back to that article that appeared. It's in my scrapbook, so I can look at that. But I think, well, as Casey Stengel said, most people his age are dead, and you could look it up. But some of the Facebook pages that serve my high school, I might just ask. Maybe somebody old enough to know is still around. I think I'll go on there and ask if Johnny Ross is still alive.
A quick look gives you the Prime Minister of New Zealand, not Johnny Ross, a wrestler, but I could look at it, look more closely. Newspaper archive might have something on that.
Well, if I just, as a starting place, first of all, to confirm the year, and then maybe even go back to, looking at wrestling season, because back at that time, there weren't all these other sports to cover. It would get maybe the state tournament, but
Right.
I'll see if I can find out. If he's alive, I'll let you know.
That'd be cool. Thank you.
Jane, to
And
go
Stu,
back.
I'm sorry. Ruth did make an appearance apparently in June of 1948 in Spencer, Iowa, at a baseball tournament, because there's a picture I've seen out of our Sioux Falls paper here, in which he was at the airport alongside a couple of kids. So
Yeah, and
that
that's
might have been one of
mentioned.
the
Jane mentions that too. In the 11 days, he traveled to Sportsman's Park, Sioux City, Sioux Falls, and then Minneapolis. That would have been the same trip.
And then he had to quit because he was in too much pain, and he went back to the hospital.
Yeah,
He
and
died 3 weeks later, I think.
but got out. Was it the premiere of was it the William Bendix movie that the premiere that he got out for? Yeah, I can understand why he'd walk out of that.
He was as doped up at that point as Mickey Mantle was when he had his come to Jesus moment.
Brent Servio, I can't read this very well, has got out on the chat, newspapers.com clip of Ross passing away, advocate for the blind. So,
When did he pass away? See it there, yeah.
Dies October 30, 1998.
Well, I didn't miss him by much.
Yeah.
Dennis, will you send me that link or whatever info you have? Was it in Minneapolis that he died?
Be interesting to see that. Yeah, I'd like to read that. See if they mention the Babe Ruth connection.
Well, I was guessing a little bit, but the age was correct, and just this kid in Minneapolis, the same name, who was blind. It's not Ross, is not the most uncommon name, but because I think I wrote about that in the Babe Ruth book. I'm updating baseball in Minnesota with a lot of Ruth stuff when he was in Minnesota, including the Sleepy Eye. And by the way, Randy Krizermick is on here, and he's from Sleepy Eye, and he's researched and done a lot with that on Ruth and Musil's barnstorming tour through that.
Yeah, Stu, I will send this to you. It was the Star Tribune was the paper on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it says he died in Hopkins.
Hopkins.
Yeah.
Can you send it to me too, please?
Jane, what's the email?
Shockingly, Jane Leavy 1 at Gmail.
I think Randy from Sleepy Eye is gone, but there's some interesting stuff on.
Randy's right here.
Huh? Oh, is he?
There.
I'm here.
Oh, great. We were hoping that the guy who picked up his home run ball was going to last 2 more years and be down there but the guy died at 107 a couple of years ago.
But you're all invited to the centennial of his visit to Sleepy Eye that's coming fall of 2022. We're going to have some kind of event. We'll keep you and Bob and the Minnesota people all posted.
Oh, we'll get our group down there together for that.
Jane can come too.
Oh, thank you.
And Randy gives a great Brown County amateur baseball tour. He hosted me an entire day of games all over the place. So we'll look forward to doing that.
Back to the previous question, Jane.
Yes.
The person who wrote that understands why he felt like he did about Koufax. He reworded the question saying, "Is Koufax more comfortable being more with himself than being with?" He prefers being by himself rather than with a large group of people.
No. Who asked that? Tom, where are you?
Yeah.
No, Tom. Like I said, he lives in that place that doesn't really exist anymore in America, which is to say he chooses not to live his life in public. That doesn't mean he's a loner. It means that his friends are not public people, or not people who then turn around and report it to public, outlets. he always says to me, well, my friends don't think I'm a misanthrope. He has more friends than anybody I know. And he has perfected the art of friendship. People always ask me, what did he do after, he retired at age 30? What did he do? Well, one thing he did is he learned carpentry and woodworking. Another thing he did was he knows more about wine than anybody I know. He became a scratch golfer, and he rode horses, and he was a traveling pitching coach in the Dodger system till Tommy Lasorda wrote him off, because Tommy's still pissed that he got kicked off the 1956 Dodgers when they had to keep 55 Dodgers when they had to keep Sandy because he was a bonus baby. He just doesn't need to trade parts of his soul for public mentions, as opposed to Tommy Lasorda. I mean, no, Sandy's one of the most convivial, great dinner guest, and he's a great dinner party partner. I mean, let me give you an example. I don't remember if I put this in the book or it was something that I thought I should keep quiet. One time I was talking to him, and he said to me, gotta go call Maury. Okay, so he means Maury Wills. I go, well, why? And he said, it's the whatever anniversary of the day he got sober. And he remembered that and had it in his little book as an anniversary that he needed to remember as every bit as important or more so than a birthday. I mean,
Yeah.
Do you have friends like that? I'm not sure I do, but it's like, that's amazing.
I perfectly understand that. That's knowing Lasorda as well as I know him, I could understand why Sandy was a little bit peeved about a lot of his actions. But I just felt, when I read the book, I felt, maybe I got the wrong impression. I just felt he was more of a person who didn't like the limelight, didn't like to take credit for what he had done. And
well, I don't think there's any false modesty there at all.
okay.
And he's very proud of what he did. And
But a very humble person at the same time.
no, I don't think so.
No, you don't think so? Okay.
I think he has in perspective what it means to be a great pitcher, as opposed to, let's say, one of the scientists who figured out how to create a vaccine for COVID-19 in 9 months. I think he just didn't want to lead the rest of his life, being unable to button his own shirt or brush his own teeth, and he didn't want to live it in neon. He wanted to be Sandy Koufax, not Sandy Koufax in quotation marks. And he's one of the few people who had the in sports that I know, who had the imagination to be able to envision a life as good and as important and as fulfilling after doing what he did on the mound as anything else. I mean, he's really smart. That's really
certainly a rarity. That's a very rarity too. And it really, thank you for that explanation. It really helps me understand it a little bit better. Thank you.
And he's funny as shit, by the way.
Do you think that's the reason that he didn't want to be quoted in your book? What's your sense of that?
I never asked him that, honestly. Look, he didn't really know me. He had, I'm sure he does due diligence on everything. So I'm sure he had checked me out and had spoken to people about the way I write and blah, 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 blah. But, he wanted deniability. If it was something he didn't like, he still hasn't read the damn thing. And that's like the biggest compliment that I could have gotten. If he was a guy who wanted to go and read as soon as he could, whatever the length of the book is, and I don't remember, as soon as he could get his hands on it, then he wouldn't have been the guy I described in all those pages. When he came to my daughter's bat mitzvah, which a story I didn't write for, 12 years or something after it happened. I had told her, like all good Jewish overly indulgent parents, oh, invite anybody you want, anything you want. And so she did. And she gives me this stack of envelopes, and I see one for Sandy, and I go, oh. And so I called him and said, look, you're going to get this invitation. This is why you're getting it. You don't have to come. You really don't. Just sign a ball and send it to her. It'll be fine. And he said, no, I'll be there for Emma, because after all, I'm the guy who's taken her mother away from her for the last 3 years. And he was first to arrive, having driven 5 hours to get there. And he didn't stay for the party, which was on a old paddle boat in the middle of the Potomac 2 weeks after 9/11. All I could think of is like 250 dead on the Potomac. Oh my God. And everybody said to me as they came on the boat, where's Sandy? Where's Sandy? Where's Sandy? And I went, well, he went home. Oh, what is he? He thinks he's too good for us? What? No, he doesn't think he's too good. He was looking forward to the ribs, to be perfectly honest. He went because he knew that if he had been at Emma's party, he would have upstaged her. And he didn't want to do that to her. That's an amazing person.
He is.
Great stuff. It sounds like he's a good guy. So, Koufax, Babe Ruth, baseball was kind of like a lifeline for him. For Koufax, it seems like, he would have preferred to be an architect or a basketball player. Did that make it easier for him to leave baseball? It wasn't a lifeline for him. He saw life after baseball.
That may well be true. I hadn't put that together. He was a basketball player in high school. He was a walk-on who made the team at the University of Cincinnati. He did not have a scholarship, everybody. But part of the reason he joined the baseball team was because the baseball team was going to New Orleans for spring break, which sounded a hell of a lot better than Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. So he went to New Orleans, and sure, I can throw. It's not like he doesn't like fun.
Fun is good. Yeah. So we're getting to 8:15
all the time. Is living well is the best revenge.
I like that. So we're getting to 8:15. I don't want to take too much of your. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was asking her a question.
Sure. Why don't you finish your question? I just want to know how. I don't want to keep you too long, Jane. So
I've got anywhere to go.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm sorry. Go on with your question.
Put on my 3 layers of masks and venture out with the dog.
It's interesting, Jane. You were born the same year I was, so
I look much younger than you.
So I remember growing up in Milwaukee, seeing all these great players come through, and Sandy Koufax was absolutely my favorite player as a kid. Not that it means anything, but I call it the golden age of baseball, because if you look at all the players that came through National League and American League, so many of them were Hall of Famers.
Well, as a percentage, I think that was higher. Is that true, Mike? I don't know that that's true. I'm not sure about that.
I didn't say the most. I said it seems like there were a lot of Hall of Famers that I saw when they came through. Mays and Clemente and Marichal and Cepeda and Banks. And
those are the ones you remember.
Huh?
Those are the ones you remember.
Johnny Antonelli.
There were plenty of bench warmers that you don't remember.
Right.
I remember.
Oh, maybe I do. Maybe I do. Ask me.
Harry Geiger.
What I do think is true about that time is that one of the things that was changing, and it certainly has reached a huge proportion, is that the size of players was starting to change. Who was it that told me this? Oh, Clark Griffith told me about a conversation he had with Mantle, I think in '65, before they both quit drinking. And he said, when I came up, there were all these little pitchers, the Spec Shays of the world and things, and I could just do whatever I wanted with them. But now these guys are, they were like Jim Palmer size, and that's a fraction of what they are today. But the game was changing so hugely, on a trajectory where we now have, the Yankees were what, 2-6-8 hitters? Not that they don't tie themselves in knots trying to hit the ball sometimes, lots of times. But, Mays and Mantle were both under 6 feet tall and under 200 pounds when they came into the league.
Absolutely. So Jane, what's your next project?
Ah,
Ha!
I haven't got a clue. Anybody got a great idea? I mean, where do you go after Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle, and Sandy Koufax?
Barry
Uh,
Bonds. Leo DeRocher.
It was done recently by a friend of mine,
Dixon.
by Dixon. Paul's a good pal. Ted Williams has been done. Joe DiMaggio done.
Ernie Banks has been done.
Yeah, and honest to God, I know you guys are Midwesterners, but in publishing, nobody gives a shit. It's just like they didn't give a shit in Brooklyn, and Duke was in Brooklyn. It's like,
How about Tom Seaver?
just done by Bill Madden.
Yeah.
Babe Didrikson just done. And done. Here are my criteria. If it's done by a friend, I won't do it. And if it's been done as well as I think I could do it, I won't do it.
Isn't
Dick
somebody
Allen.
gonna have to write about Barry Bonds at some point?
No,
Not going to be me. There's a certain amount of detritus I just don't want in my life.
yes.
Somebody's going to have to write about him. And then you're going to have to go through agents. And then you're going to have to make compromises with the devil. And I have no interest in doing that.
Yeah.
I had no idea, seriously, because it was my first biography, though not my first book, what Koufax was doing by saying, you can write whatever you want. I don't want editorial approval. I don't want money. I don't want anything. Just don't write about my niece and nephew. I mean, really, that was as good as a writer is going to get.
What kind of novel?
Dirty. Mike, you want to describe it?
Just read it. It's not the Babe Ruth book.
How do you mean that? Frank Robinson stars in it.
Oh, another guy we saw.
Yeah. Dave Weller says, how about Nolan Ryan?
Right-wing politics, just not my thing.
Well, Dick Allen.
Now,
Yeah,
I'm
he
serious.
should be in a Hall of Fame.
To tell you how crazy it is, he's not a big enough subject.
Really?
I know. Yeah, I can understand that.
That's the
Yeah,
problem.
I mean, what you and I
Should
think
be.
is
It
significant
should be a big enough
matters
subject.
isn't what New York Publishing thinks.
Wow.
I was thinking
I
about.
haven't studied for him for years. He
What do you
needs to
think
be
about
there.
a book about umpires?
Oh,
We've got one right here you could write about, right here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I mean, I thought if I could get the three, kind of greatest, you have to do Willie Clem, I don't know, the modern guy, and he's not really modern, he's also dead, that I really liked and I love talking to is Doug Harvey. But, it's the one thing you can get players and, umpires talking about is umpires. And I'm fascinated by and kind of appalled by the extent to which the game is being turned over to AI. And
oh my God, I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it too. But tell that to Jim Joyce, right?
Who's a Milwaukee guy you're talking about? Not Honora, is it?
No. Well,
No,
I don't know.
it's Bruce Fleming.
Oh, okay. Well, you just wait and you can do the book on Emma Charlesworth Sealer, one of our chapter members.
Okay.
Hey,
There are
Jane.
two women who are umpiring right now. Yeah.
Well, Jen Powell's a year ahead of Emma,
Mhm.
and Emma's had 3 years. It was going to be her 4th last year. She'll be back. And I just, by the way, watched the documentary Found in China, where Emma was adopted there and went back with her sister and her parents on a heritage tour with others, and had told her parents, I'm trying to get the story straight from her, that before they went, I think I was born near a baseball stadium, and was just kidding, and got to the Hunan province where she's from, and by her orphanage, there's a baseball stadium being constructed. I'm just trying to make sure I get the details correct on that.
Or had there been one there before?
What's that?
Had there been one there before?
I
or-
guess not. And I'm trying to, and she said, I just emailed her. She said she's got to watch the documentary again, ask her folks, because she was 11 when they went. And I tell you, watch this documentary, and she is so articulate as an 11-year-old. I mean, I'm updating baseball in Minnesota. I'm doing a profile on Emma. Now I want to kind of work that in, because she's one of the baseball crazy who's never got shunted into softball. She got a SABR scholarship by writing about, this is not our national pastime, when it shunts off the girls and women to a different sport. And I think she was baseball crazy at that age. And her mom said something about how she seemed to find solace. And, she didn't know where she was found. These kids were found. They were left at doorsteps and then turned over to an orphanage. And she didn't know the details of that, but she got back and found there's a baseball stadium being built by her orphanage.
Do you think Kim Ang is going to make it easier for female umpires?
Is she going to make what?
Kim Ang going to make it easier for female umpires?
I think it is a lot right now. And talking to Dusty Dellinger, Rich Riker, Chris Jones, the difference is that Bernice Guerra, which didn't work out, but even when Pam Postum was trying it, I think people were against that. And baseball is not necessarily going to give Jen Powell or Emma any special breaks, but I don't think they're going to face the barriers. If nothing else, baseball's got to get into the 21st century. They're lagging the other sports on
Yes,
that.
absolutely, yeah.
I don't think they're going to keep barriers in front of them.
Yeah.
I'd like to do, actually, Kim would be a good book, but if she's got any sense whatsoever, and I don't know her at all, I actually left a message for Torrey today to ask him what he thinks, but if she's got any common sense whatsoever, she'll never do it, not while working for Derek Jeter, who long ago mastered the art of talking without saying anything. And I cannot begin to think that it would be a good PR move, either in that organization or until she actually wins something, I don't know.
But I think she's already had a good effect as a senior vice president for MLB, getting these women. Now you're seeing women starting to coach in the minor leagues. Rachel Folden for the Cubs. Rachel Bolkovic for the Yankees. So they're starting to filter in, and umpiring is hard because it takes about 6 years for them to filter in through the minor leagues and reach the major leagues. So we're going to have to give her some time. But I don't know.
Yeah, she's amazing.
I'm sorry.
What about Kurt Flood?
Mike?
What about Kurt Flood?
Done.
Yeah, I think in the chat, somebody said Dick Allen has been done.
And he's not big enough, Mike.
I'm guessing.
Horace Clark?
The Horace Clark.
From the Yankees.
Yeah, the Horace. He had a whole era. Well, I would guess, Jane, though, like with the others, it's not like you said, okay, what next? But it comes around to you. You let it come to you, or then you see the opportunity rather than trying to force something and saying, okay, who's not been done? And obviously you have to have the interest in it. If you're going to take off to the extent that you do, not just, okay, here's a good topic. Just kind of comes the other way, the inspiration.
Biographies are tough if you want to be a real biographer as opposed to a baseball biographer. And I'm long past just wanting to be a baseball biographer.
What about Bob Feller?
What a shit. Who wants to write about him? Oh.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He was an interesting old cuss at the old timers games and other things. And
I have a friend who keeps calling me up and saying, how about this idea? And I'm like, you're just not getting it. And I'm obviously doing a bad job of explaining to you just how niche driven and conservative publishing, New York publishing houses are now. They only want the same thing from me. Can't you just do another one of those? You know, well, what do I want to write about something else? No, thank you. No. And, you know, biographies are, for me to be interested in it, it has to have some other dimension, either, you know, culturally, historically, not just the baseball stuff. I wanted to do Billie Jean King years ago, and the publisher said, she's too old. And then the movie came out, and, you know, suddenly she wasn't too old. Now somebody else is writing the book. And my agent said, that's not big enough for you. And I went, holy shit. I mean, what is? I mean, you know, what's big enough? You know who's big enough? And you couldn't pay me enough money? Magic Johnson. That hasn't been done. Talk about a nightmare.
Yeah. And Jane,
yeah.
This is a fascinating conversation, but I want to go back to the book briefly.
Oh, okay.
And the only reason for that is Christy Walsh kind of disappeared. It seemed like, did he tire of the Babe or something? Because all of a sudden he more or less, it felt like he cut ties from a day to day, and only when he had a project he was interested in, he might do something. Was there something?
More like Claire didn't want to give up her 25% to him. That's what he was getting. Remember how we figured that out, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike figured that out.
A good chunk.
Let me just say, I couldn't have done this book without him. Really. I mean, I told you should have gotten co-authorship. It was just, I mean, unbelievable amount of time, energy, intelligence, and math, which I am just like not good at. Got a 320 on my math GRE, and the top was 800. I think you got 200 points for signing your name. I told you that. I think the first time we spoke. And he would put.
But you have Mike, you know.
Yeah, you put it in, you know, like people language for me. No, that was Claire's doing, and you know, and his career was winding down. You know, what was he going to make money off of? I mean, you know, if it hadn't been also coincident with the Great Depression, maybe it would have been a different deal. But people weren't going to be, you know, paying money to go see Babe Ruth in vaudeville in 1934 or 1935. It just wasn't going to happen. And, you know, because Mike was the one who explained this, you know, one of the great myths about Babe Ruth was that he raised the salaries of all major leaguers. And on that fateful trip to, with the nurse who was medicating him in 47, you know, she asked him, what are you most proud of? I got up everybody's salaries. Well, he didn't. Mike's the guy to talk to about that. He got up the Yankee salaries, but he didn't raise the bar throughout baseball. And again, partly because of the Depression, in large part because of the Depression. And in large part, you know, who's going to pay a baseball player like that? You know, when everybody's on bread lines, not happening.
Well, I think we could talk all night, but I don't want to take too much of your time. So I haven't seen any more questions in the chat. So I just want to thank you. I don't know if there are any questions that people are burning to ask, or I'm sorry?
Well, a book on Bill Russell.
We're going to go
doing his own right now, or is it being done by somebody that he's cooperating with? And yes, he would be, you know, that kind of guy. And I don't think I know basketball well enough to write about it well, honestly. What I need is a boys in the boat kind of thing. You know, some unknown, untold story that isn't going to take me 8 years. It might take me 8 years to find it. It's not going to take me 8 years to write it. Any ideas? Anybody else with another idea?
I like the idea of the umpires, and you could go back to, I don't know if you know much about Amanda Clement, the woman who umpired professionally in the early 19th century.
Yeah, again, I can just hear my editor going, yes.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, thank you for joining us. I want to thank Mike Hopper for arranging her and contributing to the book. It was really interesting to see like the value of the Babe Ruth trade. It was just how ridiculous it was.
There's been a revisionist thing. Have you seen the Globe story, Mike?
Which one?
There was one in the magazine a couple of months ago. It completely took you and me to task.
No, haven't seen that.
Oh, I'll send it.
Look it up.
I'll send it to you. It's it's like one of these, committing to one of these things is it's a real relationship. You got to be sure you can live with a person. That's why, Richard Ben Kramer, when he was doing DiMaggio when I was doing Koufax, and we would talk and he said, "You are so lucky. You have no idea what it's like to spend every day with a guy who's that much of a shit." Meanwhile, I'm spending every day with Sandy Koufax. Yay. He was really envious and very helpful, I might add. What a great writer.
With the Koufax book, you really in fact, you stopped and went back to the beginning when you got the tape that Dave Smith had, right, of The Perfect Game.
Pieced together The Perfect Game from the footage that had been shot by Bill, what was his name? Not Bueller, the other Bill for the Dodgers. Sandy had a sense in August and September of '65 that something in his mechanics were off. And, so he asked one of the Dodger, clubhouse guys to shoot some footage from behind home plate. So the first 3 innings of that perfect game are recorded, no sound. You can sort of see the numbers. I could make out the 10 on Torborg's back. And I took it to Torborg and I said, "Is this what I think it is?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he got down in his catcher's crouch and he called every pitch and told me what happened on each one. And then Dave comes along with his reel-to-reel recording that his father had forgotten to turn on at the beginning of the game. So it happens to pick up right where the Dodger footage ends. And then, of course, there's Scully's last, top of the ninth, excuse me.
Wow.
Yeah. That was fun. That was a lot of fun.
So you're 69 now? Nice.
I'm not yet 69.
Okay, well then the next few
I'm younger than you.
No. Yeah, good. Well, I got 4 years and I'll be at the nice age.
Right. Not yet.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us, especially the people who joined in from the Halsey Hall, Minnesota chapter. So
thanks for having us.
Feel free to join us. I'll be in contact with our book club members about, I'd like to do Bob Beege's Orchard Field book. I really think it would be nice to just sit and talk about that. It's an incredible, like Gary Serdkowski, who we'd had for the last book club meeting, said it was probably one of the best books he's ever read on minor league baseball. So I think that's probably going to be our next book. And also we will be having our holiday party on December 19th, right?
Correct. It's
bring your own beer, bring your own booze.
Yeah.
I'm having
languages
an inaugural party.
Pardon me?
I'm having an inaugural party.
Oh, nice.
Anybody,
December 19th?
Anybody wants to
Not
go?
January.
Yeah, we're December 19th. We're doing our holiday.
Did I
party.
say January?
I like the January party too.
Yeah, see this thing, I'm looking forward to January 20th. So
you should have seen what it was like in Washington on that Saturday. It was insane.
Oh, wow.
You mean while total landscaping was going on 90 miles away?
Unreal. It's just unreal.
Yeah, but we are having a holiday party December 19th. And
I'm sorry.
And the thought was rather than, Jane's wonderful and Jane, you can come every month if you like.
Thank you.
But we thought, let's do something where we don't have a speaker and we can just talk baseball or smack or whatever. Just and you come in for 5 minutes or stay for an hour and we'll just talk. You know, we haven't been able to get together at the bar after a SABR meeting and just talk. And so maybe we can do that for a holiday party. So. And Jane, I never wanted to read a book about Koufax, and you sold me on that one too. So
I think you should read Squeeze Play.
Squeeze Play.
I recommend all her books, so.
Excellent.
You blushed all the way through Squeeze Play though, didn't you?
Now I gotta read it. I'm putting that on the list along with Bob Beege's book.
Yeah.
My mother almost died.
I took Squeeze Play up to my office at school so my kids wouldn't read it, so.
Oh, you're right. Now we have to read it.
Yeah, that's the highest praise I can give for it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
How old are they then? 25?
At the time I got the book, I think they would have still, a couple of them would have been still here at home in high school, so.
There you go. Oh, come on. They were high school kids.
Well, we need to spice it up, so
That'll
Squeeze
do
Play.
it. That'll do it.
All right.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you
you.
so much, Jane and Mike,
Thank you.
and everyone who
Thank you, Jane.
joined us.
Appreciate it.
Cape Cod League, Michael.
Yeah.
Right?
What?
Next year in Orleans for the Cape Cod League.
I'm looking forward to it.
Too big.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mike, for all your work on helping put this together. Thanks, Jane. You guys, it's been wonderful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dennis, for your help.
You
And
bet.
nice to see all your faces. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
We don't see you. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thanks. See you soon.
Yeah.
Any last questions?
I think Orchard Field's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're from Milwaukee, I always say you read the book and say, so that's who that street's named after. It's really the history of Milwaukee, just like Jane's book was a history book. You know, it was about, I learned about a ball. You read, we've all read baseball biographies. We learn about a baseball player. I felt by reading her book, The Big Fella, I learned about a person. That was the difference. And then
Absolutely, and the dynamics of the time. Yeah.
And then
And you know, you don't need to be a Yankees fan. Most of us aren't Yankees fans.
Yeah.
And then that's, to me, is a really good book that you don't have to be a Yankees fan to enjoy it. And that's like Bob's book. It's like Paul Robeson and all these other characters that had something to do with Orchard Field.
Yeah.
You know, Fritz Pollock, the great old football player. And yeah, it's, I don't know. I'd like to really cover it. So
yeah, and I've got it right there.
yeah, I've read it twice. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, you know, I'm reading this. She's got this thing about this chicken. You know, just how she went off on tangents in this book.
Yeah. Oh, the chicken. Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah. Or she broke down Babe Ruth's swing. You know, she can do that. And yeah, I thought it was really cool. So anyway, 2 months from now,